Hi everyone, most of you watch my channel without subscribing. Please subscribe if you like my stories. Have a good rest. I recently attended a work seminar out of town. It was scheduled to end on Tuesday, but my return flight wasn't until Wednesday evening. When I told my wife Emily about the extra night away, she seemed a bit frustrated but said she'd be excited to see me when I go home. After thinking about it for an hour, I realized I had been traveling a lot for work. I should make more of an effort to prioritize my wife, to whom I've been happily married for 15 wonderful years. I decided to go to the airport early and try to change my return flight. I almost gave up after so many unsuccessful attempts, but then noticed there was one flight option to an airport near our hometown. The one I usually use is about an hour north, but this other airport was nearly 2 hours south of our place. I'd never flown through there before, so I checked, and I found a flight leaving in half an hour, rushed to the ticket counter, and was able to easily purchase a seat. An hour later I was in the air, and 3 hours after that I landed at the unfamiliar airport. I rented a car, expecting to surprise Emily by arriving home around midnight. She would be overjoyed at my early and unexpected return on the drive. I smiled, mentally listing some assumptions. Emily would be home, she would be alone, and she would be delighted to see me. I decided not to call her. I wanted my early homecoming to be a total surprise. It was just before midnight when I pulled up to our house. The place was completely dark and Emily's car was gone. I found it odd, wondering where she could be so late. I tried not to jump to conclusions as I brought my bag inside and unpacked. I called Emily's cell phone, and she answered on the third ring. I cheerfully greeted her and pretended to just be checking in on her. She told me it was after midnight and she'd been asleep. Emily said she'd be at the airport tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. I'll be there at 7 sharp. I was confused and curious about her claim to have been sleeping yet clearly not being home. I casually asked her where she was, and mentioned that I had tried calling the house phone too, but only got voicemail. Emily explained that she was in bed and that our home phone wasn't working. She said that a repair technician was scheduled to come take a look at it tomorrow. My mind raced, wondering if she could possibly be telling the truth. Was she really? I was upstairs in our bed, which seemed unlikely from my vantage point downstairs. But why would Emily lie to me? I decided to test her story. I told Emily I wouldn't be on the 4 millions flight after all, and would instead be staying a few more days. I promised to call her when I had finalized my return travel plans. She expressed longing to see me soon and asked me to come home as quickly as possible. I assured her I couldn't wait to be together again. We ended the call with our usual "I love you," but I couldn't help noticing a hint of relief in Emily's voice as we said goodbye. I dialed our home number, and sure enough, it rang normally. Under different circumstances, I might have jokingly answered and had a witty phone conversation with myself, but I just didn't have the heart for humor. I went upstairs to our bedroom and searched all the closets and other potential hiding spots. And gentlemen, I thought to myself, hooding has evaporated. I thought, I might work in sales, not rocket science, but my instincts told me something was going on here that I wasn't aware of. How could I have been so oblivious? That was the question swirling through my mind. A thorough assessment led me to one conclusion: I had been extremely foolish. The next morning, I got up early and moved my rental car across the street to avoid it being spotted in the driveway. Around 8:12 a.m., I saw his car pull up to the house, driven by a man I didn't recognize. I hid in the hallway closet with the door slightly ajar so I could see and hear what was happening. Emily unlocked the front door, and they entered together. She told him she needed to quickly change and get clothes for work tomorrow to avoid having to come back here in the morning. Emily mentioned the man could. She said she needed to get some clothes for work tomorrow to avoid having to come back in the morning. She joked that he seemed to enjoy the fact that she worked under him. I couldn't believe it. She was clearly sleeping with her boss. I racked my brain trying to remember anything about him. Emily must have just started working for this man a couple of weeks ago. From what I could recall, he laughed and mentioned he'd already told his wife about Emily. He joked that when his wife met Emily, he'd have to fire her anyway. They both laughed and then embraced, sharing a passionate kiss. It was deeply upsetting to witness, but I forced myself to keep recording it all on my phone, both video and audio. Their voices were clear over the sounds of their passionate lovemaking. Good morning. I hope you had a good weekend. I just wanted to share something that happened recently. I was in my marital bedroom and I heard some pretty intense sounds coming from the next room. It was like they were having sex. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it was pretty clear what was going on. I'm not sure how long they were there, but it seemed like they were having a pretty intense experience. I'm not sure how I'm going to handle this. I'm not sure if I should tell my wife or not. What do you think? Thanks. The first time I heard about their sexual encounter, Emily said she wanted to meet up with him at least 2 or 3 times a week, not just occasionally. This was from my wife of 15 years. How did I end up in the middle of this nightmare? It seemed impossible, yet the proof was right in front of me, irrefutable audio and videos showing my wife's infidelity. I still couldn't believe it, even after seeing and hearing enough to convince any jury. But there they were. After about 60 minutes, the sounds of their lovemaking finally ceased. I assumed they were taking a break, then I heard Emily ask what that smell was. Lover didn't respond, but I heard her suddenly exclaim, "Oh my God!" Next came the sounds of them hurriedly rushing around, opening and they were closing closet doors, dresser drawers, and the laundry hamper. It was clear they were trying to clean up any evidence of their affair before I arrived. I decided to get tested for STDs as soon as possible. At that moment they both saw me. Emily gasped when she saw me, and the man she was with also looked shocked. He glanced around nervously, and his face fell. "It's not there, stud. What about your briefcase? I took it with me when I left. You know, just to be on the safe side." I watched the color drain from Henry's face. Emily's lover looked completely distraught as his eyes scanned the floor. "I took your belt too. I don't want any misunderstandings or false accusations against me." The fact that his personal items were missing seemed to upset Henry deeply. I told them I'd had a nice chat with my acquaintances and told them all about it. I also arranged a surprise for the lovers while they were busy upstairs. Henry muttered something about needing to leave immediately, so I casually offered him a beer from the fridge. My casual demeanor seemed to surprise both him and Emily. I couldn't help but smile, realizing they recalled our earlier conversation. We had a chat in the bedroom about how I would react if I caught them together before the lover could respond. Then the front door burst open, and in marched his angry wife, wielding a hefty designer handbag. She proceeded to beat Henry with her curse, while screaming at the top of her lungs. His shock left him defenseless, and he ended up cringing on the floor, losing his sheet in the process. Emily's mother and sister also joined in, and Emily just stood there, still undressed from her activities. Her mum scolded her harshly, and even suggested she consider a career in adult entertainment after that performance. Emily was too mortified to respond when I flipped the porch light on. She realized over 20 family members, friends, and neighbors were gathered on our front lawn. They were all staring and shaking their heads in disbelief. I went outside, grabbed a snack plate of chicken wings and potato salad from the food table, and went back to my seat to watch the show. It was satisfying to see Emily's naked lover struggling to cover himself with a pillow after the agony they had put me through. Emily was trying to compose herself and appear unfazed, but she was really struggling. After about 10 minutes, the chaos finally started to subside. Emily's cousin helped her auntie to her car, while another cousin helped the sulky man find his trousers and use his phone to call a cab. Emily's mother asked if she wanted to join them at the motel, but Emily declined, choosing to stay. Her mum said she understood I was likely very angry, but felt Emily had suffered enough humiliation for one night. Then the relatives all left, but not before passing judgment on Emily's reprehensible behavior. Once they were gone, Emily hid in the upstairs bathroom. I heard the shower running. I couldn't recall ever enjoying a beer and chicken wings as much as I did at that moment, sitting alone and reflecting on the satisfying orchestration of the evening's events. Everything had aligned perfectly for once in my life that evening. The plan had worked. Fessy finished eating and started cleaning up the huge mess from the impromptu party. He stored all the leftover food and took down the decorations, which took quite a while. It was past midnight by the time he finally sat down with the last beer, able to relax and process it all. Emily eventually she came out of her hiding spot and sat across from me at the table. I asked her if she was happy now and if this was what she really wanted. I also asked what would make her form such a low opinion of me. Had I done something to give her that impression, or was it all her own doing? She responded by bringing up the time I was supposedly caught with my boss. Emily asked why no one would assume it's what promiscuous men do. She was angry at me for not coming to her if we were having marital problems instead of inviting the whole neighborhood over to humiliate her. I laughed and asked if we had been having any issues she wanted to discuss. Emily went on to claim she never actually meant any harm. It was just, "I wish she'd told me about the fling sooner." I said I felt awful for overreacting. Emily asked me to stop being hurtful and act civilized. After showering and dressing, I decided to go out for a nice steak dinner. Cooking held no appeal given my emotional state. The food was decent, so I moved on to a local pub for a few drinks. I felt like I had a right to treat myself a little after everything that had happened. It was about a month later, and I was feeling pretty stressed out. I went to a bar to unwind. My buddy Paul was sitting at the bar and noticed me walking alone. He asked if Eid had left my wife and kids for the night. I told him that I had, and I told him that I had come home to an empty house to divorce. Paul was shocked when he saw the papers from Emily. He said he never saw that coming. I agreed, saying I was just as blindsided by Emily's decision to leave me. I told Paul that she had moved in with a guy named Henry Carslake. Paul was floored, asking if it was the same Henry who owned Karate Construction. I simply confirmed it was one and the same. I also confessed my suspicion that Emily had. Paul asked what I was going to do next. I told him I would agree to the divorce because Emily didn't want anything from me, like the house or money. I also mentioned that there were adoption papers she wanted me to sign, but I'd shred them. Paul then asked what exactly Emily wanted me to sign. I downed my whiskey and explained that she actually expected me to let Henry adopt my 2 children. Paul shook his head in disgust and made some choice remarks about Henry C. Lake. I agreed with him. I mentioned that I was scheduled to start a big project with Castle Construction on Monday, but after recent events, I would clearly need to find a new job. I ended up signing the divorce papers, despite Emily's repeated attempts to convince me otherwise. She finally gave up when I refused to make concessions once the divorce was finalized. My children, aged around 10 and 8, moved in with her permanently. I wanted to get back at Henry somehow, but without landing myself in legal trouble. I simply failed to show up. For work that Monday, it was strange that no one from his company asked me for an explanation. Part of my revenge came about without any effort on my part. People started saying how Castle Laker treated me, and many local contractors refused to work with him. They turned down his projects in solidarity. Although Henry eventually found contractors from out of state, their work was 6 months later. My divorce was final. Just 3 months after that, Emily and Henry got married. I took the kids for a week while the newlyweds went on their honeymoon. I didn't do it as a favor to them, of course. I just wanted more time with Chloe and Lee than I got on weekends. What bothered me most was when Chloe asked Daddy, "Why did you send us to go live with Moore?" I was taken aback, but I told her that wasn't the case. I explained to Chloe that I didn't choose for your mother to take you away from me, because she stopped loving me. If it were up to me, you could have stayed here. I told Chloe I planned to talk to Emily about being honest with the kids the next time she came to pick them up. I warned that if Emily didn't, I told her the truth. Emily just got really frustrated and walked off, but I felt like I'd made my point by speaking up. It was strange being a newly single dad after being married for so long. Friends tried setting me up on dates, but I just wasn't interested. I wanted romantic love again, but I wasn't ready for the complications of dating. I had no idea that my life was about to change in an unexpected way. My neighbors were Gary and Emily, who had moved in shortly after my ex had moved out. Their house was a bargain, but it needed a lot of renovations. Emily worked as a secretary, while Gary was a retired army man. We quickly became friends, and they seemed like very nice people whenever we interacted with them. We'd chat when we saw each other, but things took a tragic turn when Gary had a major health crisis at work. The paramedics and doctor rushed to the scene, but Gary was pronounced dead. It turned out he'd had an undiagnosed brain aneurysm. Poor Emily was absolutely distraught, as her parents were away on vacation. I walked her home after the incident. I made her a few drinks and listened to her talk about what the future held for her. Emily soon fell asleep on my couch, so I covered her with a blanket and took the armchair in case she woke up and needed anything. The next morning, I walked Emily out just as my ex-wife Emily arrived to drop off her kids. She said, Good to see you're not wasting any time, and I told her to let her have a rest. She's just lost her husband. My ex just laughed it off and walked away. I told Chloe and Lee what had happened. Chloe seemed really sad for Emily. I don't think Lee really understood what had happened. Emily later invited me to Gary's funeral, which I went to. His parents thanked me for checking on Emily, as she had no family nearby except co-workers. I told the workers I'd keep an eye on Emily and help out with minor repairs and chores on my next custody weekend. Emily didn't even get out of the car when she dropped off the kids, which was fine with me as I didn't want to interact with her. Emily and I started spending a lot of time together, just as friends. About a year later, Lee was chatting with Emily in her yard, and I called out to him not to be a pest. Emily said she enjoyed his company, so I suggested she join us for dinner. One night, if she wanted to, Lee was up for it. We all laughed about my son's matchmaking skills after dinner. Emily helped clean up and sat chatting for a bit before going home. I thanked her for coming over and for being such a good friend. Chloe asked with a grin if Emily was my girlfriend. I quickly clarified that we were just friends and neighbors, but I did hope he might become more someday. I kept that thought to myself for the time being. On Emily's next visit, she asked about my relationship with her in a snide way. I said it was just a friendship and that my personal life was none of her concern. Emily and I kept getting closer. About a year after Gary died, I worked up the nerve to ask her out. She said yes, and we had a great time at dinner on Saturday. Afterwards, I walked her to the door. Emily thanked me for a great night and surprised me with a passionate kiss that left me breathless. She suggested we go out again sometime and see where things may lead. I agreed, and we did. We kept dating and eventually started having sex. Emily was really sensual and affectionate. Our intimacy was very fulfilling and satisfying as we spent more and more time together. Emily eventually sold her house and moved in with me. They were thrilled, and it was clear that Chloe and Lee hoped Emily would become their stepmom. My ex-girlfriend Emily was not at all happy about this new development, but I didn't care. She left me. Yet here Emily and I dated for a year before deciding to get married. When the kids excitedly told my wife Emily was not happy about the news. She frowned and turned away without responding. Emily and I had a small outdoor wedding ceremony attended by close friends and family for our honeymoon. We went on a relaxing tropical getaway. It was incredibly romantic and brought us even closer together in the following years. Emily and I had 2 sons of our own, who we named Gary and Robert after her late first husband and father. My older children, Chloe and Lee, were now teenagers and able to visit on their own without my ex. My wife came along, which was a nice change of pace. One day, Chloe, who was 19 at the time, came over excited to tell me that she was engaged. Her boyfriend, Josh, had proposed the night before, and he offered to help pay for the wedding expenses. Chloe explained that at first, they thought they could afford a simple wedding themselves, but then my wealthy ex-father-in-law, Henry, had kindly offered to cover all the costs, but he wanted to walk CL down the aisle. I told him no, so he backed off. I was upset when I heard how Henry had manipulated the situation. Emily suggested we use money from the sale of her old house to pay for the wedding instead. I was reluctant at first, but she convinced me. Emily's money, but she said it was important that CL have her dream wedding. I told Chloe that Emily and I would take care of all the expenses, and she was really happy. We came up with a reasonable budget that covered everything the young couple wanted for their special day. The next day, Chloe told me that Henry was really angry about not being able to walk her down the aisle. My ex, Emily, was also clearly annoyed by this turn of events. One afternoon not long before the wedding, my teenage son Lease showed up unexpectedly in our backyard. He said he'd left home after another fight with his mom and Henry. Emily assumed it was related to the wedding drama, but Lee revealed the clashes were over something else entirely. He'd overheard his mother complaining about Henry's lackluster performance in the bedroom lately. We all had a good laugh over that. Lee decided to just spend the night at our place to get away from the negativity on the morning of the wedding. Emily arrived with Lee, but she was clearly in a bad mood at the ceremony. Emily and I sat in the front row while Henry and my ex-wife were seated in the back. The church service went well, and at the reception, Henry was stuck at a table with Emily's relatives, while my ex, after dinner and speeches, Emily joined Lee and our young sons at the head table. When the staff cleared space for dancing, Emily and I joined Chloe and her new husband Josh for a beautiful first dance as a married couple. My ex-wife and Henry joined us later in the evening. Emily and I were chatting at the bar when by that point, my wife had had a few drinks. I braced myself, knowing this interaction wouldn't go well. My ex made some comments about Emily's youthful appearance and figure, even criticizing her wedding dress. I reminded her that we were divorced and I was remarried. She no longer had any right to stick her nose in my life. Emily walked away, feeling uncomfortable. My ex continued making disparaging remarks about her. I'd had enough, loud enough for Henry nearby to hear. I told my wife that Emily was a better woman than she could ever be, and that our marriage was extremely fulfilling. I also mentioned that my ex-wife was not at all what I had hoped for. My wife was left speechless. Henry rushed over to calm things down, but I walked away satisfied before he could get involved. Emily and I danced together happily for the rest of the night as we swayed together. She asked what had happened at the bar. I told her not to worry about it and pulled her in for a tender kiss. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my ex. My wife was glaring at us as I looked lovingly at my new wife, Emily. I couldn't help thinking I'd made a great trade. My life was truly complete thanks to her. I got revenge on the wife who'd hurt me and discovered true happiness with Emily.